Hey, what's up, guys? Lucas Burnley here. You are listening to the Edge and Flow podcast, where we talk about all things knife industry, life, personal improvement. Uh, I don't
Mhm.
know, speeding up, slowing down,
Sharpening.
sharpening.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm here with my co-host TJ Schwartz, and yeah, let's get it
Yeah,
rolling, man. How's your day going?
howdy. Uh, it's been a good day, actually. Shipped a bunch of knives. It always feels good to ship knives. It just to see the order list kind of shrink and
Yeah.
see product go out the door, that's a culmination that feels good.
Yeah.
So,
Closure.
pretty good push today. And
Nice.
we just had a couple of top level announcements actually to start this pod.
Let's
So,
do it.
we have launched Patreon a few weeks back.
Yep.
Really excited about that. Got a group of guys in there, and they've been really awesome, commenting, asking questions, all that good stuff. And we recently rolled out a Discord, which is a conversational platform. And we sort of struggled with how to assimilate it with the Patreon and how to have people migrating through Patreon into Discord. And then it occurred to me after looking in Patreon, there were people using it as if it was like a Discord because it now has these community chat functions, which might be kind of new to Patreon. I'm not sure. But it made me wonder if perhaps Discord has become like redundant and maybe an overcomplication of the just network that we're trying to build. So we went ahead and discarded the Discord
Yeah,
and
for now.
for
But
now.
yeah, we'll see.
Yeah,
But
but the Patreon chats are in the place of that. So if you want to like chat, we've seen a lot of activity this week, and I'm really excited about that. And there's been some interesting conversations happening. That's happening inside of Patreon, and they have a cool app now. So I wanted to thank the people that are in there. We have one question to answer from a guy in there, and then yeah, just point out that there's some cool stuff going on.
yeah, this is a fun one. I think actually this is a case of I want to say like me reading the room wrong. I don't think it's that. I think it is Discord is an amazing platform. Okay. It like hits all of the high points for me as far as like what we're trying to do, which is it's super easy to access. It's good at building community. Um, it is like very user friendly, right? And it's separate from a lot of like social media streams, which like is more and more kind of important for me on a
Hmm.
personal level. Just like if I go on Instagram, I stay on Instagram a lot of times. Like I go down the rabbit hole.
Hmm.
But I had a preconceived notion of like how we would use Discord that was probably had started before we even really started like looking at that as an option or like Patreon as an option, right? Because I
Hmm.
wanted to do
Hmm.
a Discord. It's a good process. It's not a good process for us now. And
Yeah.
you like called it like perfectly. You're like, this is like adding a step. It's an inefficiency that can be like handled in a more streamlined way. And as soon as you said that, like we killed it. And I instantly realized how much easier it was.
Well, hopefully it feels that way from the user side. So if you guys are using Patreon, if you're communicating with us in there, be sure to pop in there, let us know how it works. Uh, I think the whole point too that we're getting across is like this is a work in progress, and we're just
Yeah.
we're having to set this up because like from a social media standpoint, things are ever changing,
Yeah.
and we've been at this over a year now, the podcast. But as far as this more community focused side, that's kind of a new thing we want to integrate. So
Yeah.
yeah, just bear with us, and I hope you guys tag along and enjoy what's going on.
I want you to dive into a little bit of the thought like around social media. Like, why do we not just want to use our standard media channels in relation to the pod?
So
Because there's a
you
reason.
you hit the nail right on the head when you talked about Instagram, which is Instagram, I am bummed to say, has turned into like a dopamine addiction machine. And I think I'm as vulnerable as anybody else. And I think we all know how that feels. Like you can't even passingly look into that app without like getting drawn in for 15 minutes. It's crazy how it works like that.
Yeah.
And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be less algorithmic and more forum like. And I found it where I'm actually running out of capacity to manage social medias.
Yes.
And with something like Discord or Patreon or something like that, you nailed it, which is like less. There's a great phrase. There's more signal and less noise,
Yeah.
and the signal that you're actually trying to tune into is there, and you don't have the ads, you don't have the viral TikTok like stuff that's just smattering the whole thing. And so I'm trying to have quality conversations with quality people that follow us that are not mixed in with basically digital drugs. You know what I
Well,
mean?
and
For me.
also like you and I have had enough of a social media presence that there's a lot of noise just in our just in our inboxes. And so for me, I know that like I want to be able to talk about topics as they relate to the pod, but I'm also wanting to protect like my time and realizing that like we can put out a podcast every week and we can have conversations. We will get questions and like conversations will start around that, but I don't want that to grow into more time on social media specifically, which is I
Yeah.
think why Patreon makes sense in this case, because it's kind of like directed. Like you and I can
Hmm.
basically like go in there, have conversations around this, but not have to like also see 10 other messages in my DMs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you
Yeah,
go.
that's absolutely the case. And so I do see that we have a question in there that we should answer.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to click on that. It is Will from Maine. Looks like, I think it's Spruce Hill Blades, I believe. But he was asking about going from a fixed blade to a folding knife design. Any advice for into tapping into certain markets as well? But I think he's talking about the move design wise from fixed blade to folder.
That's a fun one
Yeah.
because I think you and I have two different perspectives, or at least two different
Hmm.
areas of expertise on this.
I went
Okay.
from folders to fixed blades. I went the other
It's
way.
true. You did. But you're going from pure design too,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Can I start this one?
Do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think a big part of it has to do with how he's making knives.
Hmm.
So if I'm not mistaken, he's already like CNC capable. He's like
I
designing in CAD,
I'm actually not 100% sure on
I
that.
believe.
Yeah.
And okay, so here's where it goes, right? If you are a fixed blade maker and you want to move into folders and you are hand making everything, there is a chance that there are a few pieces of machinery that will benefit you, but you can basically do it with your standard. Like if you have a bandsaw, a drill press, and a grinder, you can make a folder.
Hmm.
It is hard to make folders effectively, but that's not the point. Um,
Hmm.
if he is looking at this more from like a product line standpoint, like, hey, I am producing knives, I'm a working shop, and I've got like numbers going out, the switch to having knives coming off of that type of scenario, like new fixturing, it becomes more complicated. But I would say that like regardless, either way, number one thing would just be to get all of the data on how to build folders correctly from a historical standpoint.
I was going to say the same thing. I
Okay.
think he's on the right track in asking us about what we know about folder design,
Yep.
because I think step one is to ask a lot of questions,
Yep.
because I can say from experience, folders are a little bit more complicated geometrically than they appear.
Yep.
Um, lock, rock, and lock stick, and all these little things that don't necessarily prevent a knife from folding and locking, but can make
Right.
it struggle to be smooth and have the action that you want.
Yeah.
They're avoidable pitfalls. And
Yep.
so the first I'm just going to throw out there, just to be like specific, is imagine your stop pin and your lock, whatever it is, whether it's a axis style or a lock arm or compression lock, whatever it is. You need to have the two forces from the pin and the lock interface driving against the pivot barrel, so that they become a point of like a triangle of essentially like opposing forces. It is possible to design a lock where the pivot barrel is not really part of a triangle, and those forces oppose each other from the stop pin and the lock, and then the barrel is allowed to float. I hope that makes some sense. But having a like triangular forces that create a three-way bind between those three things actually lower the requirements for like tight tolerances a lot.
Hmm.
So if you look at like inexpensive folders, like the Overland from CRKT, it's like an affordable mass market manufactured knife. Like it does not have lock rock at all, and it's not necessarily because they're holding tight tolerances. It's because the geometry is such that the pivot barrel can be quite widely toleranced and it will not
Still
rock.
function.
Yeah, and so it's the bigger the triangle and the more, like, you don't want them in a line, if that makes sense. It's a little hard to explain without an image, but
Yep.
um
Well, and this to this point, like, just go buy the modern tactical folder from Bob
yeah.
Terzula. Like,
Yeah.
that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's like step one,
Mhm.
because the way that he wrote that book and the concepts and techniques that he explains in it, regardless of how you are actually going to manufacture a knife, that gets you from like point A to point B. That is like the logic chasm that you need to be
Mhm.
able to understand. And there are a lot of folders that are being made that are like actually not great,
Mhm.
where you've got a lot of horsepower to build the thing, but it is lacking in the design side. So
Yeah.
like I say to start with, like, figure out a couple books. Bob T's book is
Yeah.
amazing. Um, Alan Elishewitz did one with Blade. I mean, there's a few. Just get the general concepts. Past that, it's just a knife, and that it's weird to me because like on the custom side, you'll have a knife maker who's like making very nice fixed blades. Everything is like good from like a proportion, fit, finish, like, scale standpoint, and they'll make a folder and it's like a stumpy brick.
Mhm.
And it's like, no, man, it's still just a knife. Like, you clearly see how to make this thing that is attractive, and it's like all of it goes out the window
Yeah.
over three things, which is like, lock, stop, and pivot.
Yep.
Just a knife.
Yeah, and another like very specific thing is being thin is way favorable in the folder world,
Yes.
and it's way less favorable in the fixed blade world. So if you're in the habit of one or the other, like start to think
Ooh,
about that.
don't make
Um,
stumpy bricks.
yeah, exactly. You almost can't go too thin on a folder. Like there's going to be some people that are bothered by being too thin, but the market generally likes thin in the
Yeah,
folder
and
side.
I'm now thinking of some very like specific counter arguments to that. Like,
Yeah,
there are people who like
yeah,
very beefy thick
yeah.
folders. So like
But,
ultimately it has to fit your design style.
mhm.
I'm referencing like, just, it's like general knife making where like all of a sudden they forget to contour scales if they're contouring on their fixed blades, and it's weird to me.
Yeah, yeah,
Go buy Bob's book.
yeah.
Start there.
Yeah. So that is a can of worms. So I feel like we kind of approached it,
Yeah.
but keep asking questions, man, for
I don't think
sure.
we can dive into the markets question without more info. I posted that in
Yeah.
that thread too. I
Yeah.
think we need a little more detail.
Yeah, we can continue that also in the chats over
Yeah,
there too. That's a good
good plan.
question. Um so one other announcement, just kind of top line item. I did launch the CAD course. So designincad.com.
I am
And
currently a student of this course.
mhm, yes, sir. Check it out, guys. We talked about it so much last week that I don't want
You
to
don't
kill a
want
whole
to.
bunch of time, but I
It's
just
fine.
want to let you guys know you can check it out.
Okay, good. It's good stuff.
All right, you threw something on our list here
Ooh,
to talk about.
ooh. Okay, this is two things. We got half measures. Okay, I wanted to talk about that, and I want to bring up something that I think is super relevant right now to like both customers and makers. Which one should I start with?
Let's talk
What do you
about
think,
half
Mike?
measures real
Okay,
quick.
half measures. Man, when are half measures like an acceptable method to get things done?
So I've been thinking a lot about this because we touched on this a long time ago on the pod very briefly. And I've been thinking a lot about it because I did a lot of what I would call half measures when I was setting up my current shop in order to become operational as soon as possible. And I've been reviewing that idea and trying to decide whether all of those decisions were good or not.
Okay.
Um, I think half measures can be good if they produce a reliable outcome, but if the compromise is like maybe it's not as efficient, maybe it's not as premium, maybe the results aren't exactly what you're looking for, but at least it's reliable. From my standpoint, like I place reliability so high on the totem pole that I just have several processes that to me feel like half measures, but they have done their job because they have been reliable. I guess that's
Right.
where I'm coming from.
I was trying to think about this. Like, I think in my brain, I equate half measure with half assed,
Hmm.
and I'm actually not sure that they're the same thing.
Hmm.
So, half assed, obviously, immediately negative connotation. Just means
Yeah.
you didn't do the job.
Yeah.
Okay. I think if you have perfectionist tendencies, it's very easy to look at anything you do that is not at 100% either like output or capacity or capability as like a failure.
Hmm.
Okay. Recently, I've started to look at the idea of like half measures in maybe like a slightly different light, which is that like it might be a solution that is temporary in nature, but needs to be made. Right. I guess there's another way to look at that, which is just like they're just like smaller steps or like,
Hmm.
something kind of like evolving, but it's not what it feels like to me when I make one of those decisions.
Yeah.
So recently, the reason that this came up was I am building product for the Kentucky Custom Knife Show. We talked about that a little bit, and I'm not going. I'm sending product. I'm not going. What I'm seeing is that in my brain, I feel like it is a half measure, and I'm trying to kind of figure out like overall if it's a positive, if it's like net positive gain.
Hmm.
Um, it's tricky. And this is like the first situation where I've been in recently where I'm really looking at it being like proportionally, like it's great. Like I have product at the show. I know that I've got a lot of customers at the show, and friends that are like excited to see product. I love the show, so I want to support it. I have the means of like being able to send the product, and like, Chris is going to run the table. So it's like having a hand in a show and like being part of the community. But I don't think it's like a 50-50 split. Like I almost feel like I'm doing 80% of the work on the front end, but then by not physically being there, maybe I'm getting like 30% of the like community return.
Mm.
Like even
Yeah.
for like just on my side even. And it's an
Hmm.
interesting thing because I'm like, at what point do you just say like, no? Is it a 50%?
Yeah.
Is it 80%? Where you're
Right.
like, I can't do this the way that I want to do it, so it's not worth it.
Hmm.
It's tricky.
Yeah. That I think it also ventures into the. Have you ever heard of the toolbox fallacy?
No.
Um, Half measure can mean a lot of things, but the toolbox fallacy is that you can't start a job until you have all the tools necessary to do the job. Um,
Incorrect.
and right, but they call it the fallacy of the toolbox in that you have to start the project to know what
Yes.
tools you need, and if
Yeah.
you never start,
Ooh.
then if you're waiting for all the tools to be in the toolbox, like you'll never start. I think that's the general fallacy that is
I'm
describing.
gonna go out on a limb here and say that one is gonna hit real hard with all of my ADHD folks out there because that ties perfectly into perfectionist tendencies, which is I'm gonna wait till everything is in place to start the thing, and with executive function issues, that is insanely hard.
Hmm.
So it's like you have a very hard time actually getting the things in place, and you also have a hard time starting when they're not in place.
Hmm.
I've never heard of that. I'm gonna look that up. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess in this situation right now, this is relating to like end business. This is like, this is like It's shipping product almost. It's like the end game, like going to a show, making product. Like, why do I go to a show? It's to see people. So
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you remove that, does the value of having product at a show go away? On one hand, I know it doesn't, because you're still maintaining a presence. The question is if the time is worthwhile or could have been used better, or like in my case, do I make a decision and I say, hey, I know I'm really time leveraged. I can't do the show the way that I want to from a product standpoint. But if I say I'm going to take half as much product, but physically be there,
Mm-hmm.
do I get more gain, or do my collectors get more gain, or the industry get more gain if I make 100% of the product, but I'm not there?
Right.
And I've
Yeah.
been like, I just keep running this through different processes in the shop. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, this is weird.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That was my thought.
Yeah. No, I think you and I are on different tracks as far as what we're thinking of when we say half measure.
I
I
know.
think that definitionally they're the same thing, but we're like, I'm just trying to align my thoughts with what you're describing. So in a situation where you're limited in either time or money,
Yep.
resources wise, either you completely opt out of something
Yes.
or you half measure it because you cannot full measure everything.
Right.
So the question is, when you realize you cannot go all in, do you go all out by default, or when do you decide to half measure?
And what is that percentage?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I know this is like super heady kind of
Yeah.
like thought process around
Yeah.
this. It's easy with tools. Like, hey,
Yeah.
there's a job that I need to get done. The nice machine that does it is $25,000,
Harbor
but
Freight it is.
I can buy the Harbor Freight version
Yeah.
for $1,000 and I can do the work for 6 months. That's actually very easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When it starts to go past that into time, resources,
Yeah.
things like that, I think
Yeah.
it gets harder.
And that's why I'm thinking as I'm talking here, because I was thinking more from the tools and
Yeah.
and physical asset standpoint, which is, like you said, it's easier to approach that because it's
Yeah.
more numbers. You can-
Compressors are probably the most common like half
Yeah.
measure.
Yeah.
You're like, I know I want good clean air.
I just need a
I'm
lot of
going to
air
Home
in
Depot.
a metal tank. Yeah.
Yeah, I need air in a metal tank,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
then 15 years later, you're like still using that.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. That brings me to my next kind of related thought. Dude, are there too many knife shows?
I have not historically gone to very many knife shows
I know.
besides the big ones. So
That's why I want you. I want to hear what you see.
I'm hearing about a lot of knife shows for sure, especially on like the high end custom side. You know, you got like California Custom Knife Show, Kentucky, Pacific Northwest. Like,
There's basically a show every month.
yeah, yeah. I think it has the likelihood of being fatiguing. I think it probably is. I think it does grow the market in that if it's in the neck of the woods of someone who's not going to fly or go more than like one state away, it could add a bigger audience if you're willing to travel to get to those people. But
So that's a metric that I would, if anybody is listening to this that is a show promoter, I would love to know the metric of how many local
yeah,
ticket sales there are.
how many people are traveling versus
Yeah.
within like one state
Because
radius?
what I see on our side is I see makers are definitely getting fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And collectors are getting fatigued. This matters in different ways, but it very much matters. I
Mhm.
think that what I'm seeing is I'm seeing shows with like very good rosters, and then I'm noticing collectors who are not making the trip to this show. Whereas a few years ago or a year ago, whatever, it would have been a no miss scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've talked a lot about like my love of our industry, and so like my concern is if makers are feeling like they have to be at a show every month or something, and collectors are wanting to support and like spend time, and there's like a burnout scenario on this, I just see it as like cannibalizing itself. And I
Mhm.
don't know that any of the show promoters talk to each other. I don't know that there's any thought process around, I mean, because this is kind of like a goose with a golden egg. As a maker, the fact that someone will get on a plane and fly to a city to like hang out with you and spend money as an industry or as a maker is amazing. Like, we're
Mhm.
very fortunate.
Mhm.
If it starts to get tiresome, like that hurts the entire
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah. Um, I over the last decade, I've really enjoyed the fact that there's like a yearly pilgrimage to say some place like Atlanta.
Right.
Um, and I just haven't been attracted to the smaller shows, and I only think it's because of partly it's the market position we are taking. It's the angle we are taking, but also I like the ability to like focus on what's going on in our house, in our shop for
Right.
most of the year and then go out like with a bang like to Atlanta, you know what I mean, or to
Yep.
Salt Lake or something, and it just be like this kind of very seasonal, very specific concerted effort that revolves around this one weekend.
Yep.
It's kind of like Christmas once a year, and if it
Right.
was any more than that, it
If it
wouldn't be
was once a
Christmas anymore.
month, you'd have a
Yeah.
hard time.
Yeah. But I also think like it's on us as makers to pick the shows that make sense for us, not because there's some exterior pressure to go
Yeah.
to the shows. And I think if people are organically picking the shows that make sense,
Yeah.
I think that any pressure being added should be like
There's like a
gotten rid of.
self-correcting.
Yeah.
I think in a perfect world that's what happens, but I
Mhm.
think like, and I can look at this from both sides, because like you and me go to the big shows for the same reasons. Now your reasons are different because you're actually in your manufacturing,
Mhm.
but at the point where it was just design, I might have been there with knives that I made, but I was also there because the companies were there,
Mhm.
right? They're not at the small shows. Me as a custom maker, I love small shows. Like, I absolutely love to go someplace and spend 6 hours with a small group of people and like have a couple beers and like be able to connect with people on like a more intimate one-on-one level, for one night and go home.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it just right now, like, I don't know, like it feels tumultuous because things keep getting added, nothing is getting removed. I think that as makers, like, I even notice it, like I have FOMO because I don't want to, like, I know that if I miss a show, I'm like, oh man, that's like someone else is there.
Mhm.
I'm very confident in my reasons, right? Which are my family, my work. Like, I know why I'm doing this. And I know that I want to be able to do shows kind of that, like you said, like they count, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
figuring out what that looks like, I think, is tricky. And this show where I'm sending product to, it's not without excitement because this is something I haven't tried. I have gone to shows without taking product, like we've talked about that, and like the result is much better than I had kind of expected it would be,
Mhm.
right? And this is what I wanted to try, which is the exact opposite. It's like, if you have the product but I'm not there, is that still a, a benefit to
Mhm.
anyone?
Mhm.
So I don't know. It's on my mind a lot lately. So like, if you are a maker and you are looking at the show roster and feeling like overwhelmed by that, I would just say, like, don't try to do everything.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if you are listening to this as a collector, like,
Same advice probably.
same advice. Like, we love you
Mhm.
guys and like we appreciate the support, but like, I also don't want you guys getting
Yeah.
completely run down just because you're feeling like you need to be at every show. Like,
Yeah.
and I would love some feedback on this. Like, this is one, like, if you guys can drop us messages, I want to see if other people are seeing this or have
Mhm.
feelings around it, because like it could just be me.
Yeah. Yeah, I like I said, I don't have a good gauge of that.
Yeah.
Because I hit the big ones and they feel big just like they
Yeah.
always have. So I just I don't have a good gauge, but it's really interesting to think about, especially as I kind of scale the business up. It's market saturation is a natural part of capitalism. You know what I mean? Like their markets expose themselves, then they saturate themselves, then they soften, then
Right.
they, it's like it's a cycle. So I
Yeah.
mean, I guess
And
it's not
maybe we're
shocking.
at that. Maybe there's going to
Yeah,
be more and more shows added, and then there will
yeah,
be a correction. Um, some of this stuff like might tie to the economy. I don't know. Like, I don't know
yeah,
what's happened in the last few years that like for years and years, the shows like kind of felt consistent.
yeah.
And then
Can
all
I
of a sudden it was like this bump.
put something on record
Okay.
that may be foreboding and may come back to bite me?
Okay.
But like, I have turned over a new leaf in that I'm going to, other than a few specific circumstances, going to basically completely ignore the macroeconomy. Like,
Yeah, that's fair.
pretend
I
that the
think that's best
macroeconomy
advice.
is a non-existent,
Yeah.
ethereal, might as well be aliens on a different planet, because that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
I feel like we are talking about the macro situation too much. Um,
As
and
like culturally.
culturally, yeah,
Yeah,
not
sure.
just makers. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, like, I think there's a phrase that's like, what happens in your house is more important than what happens in the White House, and
Right.
that kind of stuff. Like, I just totally agree with that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Not to get, I don't mean that in a political way. I'm just talking about in terms of, if you're trying to pay attention to every law that's passed, every tax bill, everything the Federal Reserve does, like, you're missing opportunities that are right in front of you.
Yeah.
So I didn't used to be that way. I used to watch all the videos on all the macro stuff, trying to like see the trends, and I just don't want to do it anymore.
That essentially, I mean, that is true of many facets of life though. Right.
Hmm.
I mean, this is like these are like the classic tropes. Like if you're watching what your neighbors are doing, you're not doing what you should be doing,
Yeah,
or if you're like, trying to keep up, or
yeah,
industry ever, like Tom Crine always says, run your own race. I know he
yeah,
didn't like, it's not his quote, but it's who I think of saying it. And it's
yeah,
totally right.
yeah,
Because you can't watch social media and be like, oh, they're doing this and this and this is super cool. You're better off just doing it.
yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the economy as a whole right now,
Hmm.
for that same reason.
And I would say even the knife market in general,
Yep.
I would consider that another macro thing that I
Yep.
am choosing not to pay attention to. I remember, like, anecdotally, there was a time when I was making knives before where I was just getting into it. I had been designing, but this was like 2015 or 14,
Yep.
15 probably. And a collector I was like messaging on Instagram was like, "Hey man, I don't know if it's a good time to get into making knives. Like, it
Yeah.
feels like the secondary is softening."
Yeah.
And that stuck with me for like 2 years,
Yeah.
because every time I had a knife that I was like, "Oh, it didn't sell instantly." I'm like, "Is this all softening? Like, am I walking into like a mire that I'm like
Oh,
gonna
that's
be worse?"
super
And
interesting.
I like dwelled on like one comment. Not that it was like a negative comment in any way,
Yeah.
just that it was like, I'm taking something into account that
Right.
doesn't really pertain to me,
Yeah.
that I could like persevere through, that I should have.
Right.
And so I kind of stalled a little bit on making at that point. There's even like tracing to like just one or two instances of that, like, could have slowed down my entire business progression
Yeah.
quite a bit, like, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just don't think that's
Well,
wise.
to what end?
Yeah.
Like the negative, like you and I maintain like a pretty like positive tone, I think in
Hmm.
general, like on the pod, but like also just in life, like we're not focusing on the negatives very often. I think a lot of times when you are starting something new, people will focus on the negatives because it's like the easy thing to like
Hmm.
grasp onto, or like it's cautionary, and they're coming at it from a good place.
Hmm.
But yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to worry about what's going on in my shop. I'm going to worry about what my customers want. I'm going to
Yep.
worry about my family, and then, like, macroeconomy, greater knife market as a whole,
Yep.
like, is what it is.
Yeah. I think where I was at
Yeah.
with that is more just like kind of cross linking.
Yeah.
I think there's things that are tying in, right? Like,
Hmm.
you're seeing like, okay, the high end knife market, like there's different price points. Like, where are those sitting right now? Like, some of that stuff is selling slower.
Hmm.
There's less discretionary spending. Like, there's things that are definitely trends, but it can
Hmm.
also just be just tastes. It can
Yeah.
be availability. There's
And-
so many things that as makers, we kind of, not to like dwell on them, but you kind of just have them in your periphery
Yeah.
that I think are valuable. And the one that I feel right now is this thing around shows. And maybe there is a net positive, like maybe it's bringing more people in.
Mhm.
But I think it's a good time for makers and collectors to be honest with themselves about like what their means and resources can provide, because we would rather have people in the industry for a long time.
Yeah.
As opposed to like being like, I can't do this. It's horrible.
Yeah.
I'm burnt out, tired of this.
Turn it into a rat race.
Turn it into a rat race.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. Those are my two half measures and shows.
There's another one on there that you put
Oh,
on there.
dang it.
Scope creep.
Okay. This one, I think this one is for you because I look up to you in your efficiency. Okay. So scope creep as it relates.
Having never visited the shop, but you got to visit the shop and then see how much.
I will visit the shop very soon. Can you hear me honking?
You're right.
Okay. Scope creep, right? What is it? You start a project and slowly the scale of that project increases. Okay. Whether that is scaling numbers, scaling the design, your manufacturing process, whatever it is. I suffer from this around almost everything that I do. Right. So if I go to sweep, I'll sweep and then I will notice the coolant that I didn't clean. And then it might be really easy to be like, well, yeah, that's just cleaning. But like, if you have executive function issues, it's a constant thing. So like, I'm trying to train myself out of it. I was curious if like when you start a project, are you able to, do you stay like fairly on topic?
It's a good question. I do have a tendency to refuse to stop doing something until it's done. My wife would not agree if I'm like caulking the bathroom that I need to be finishing, even though I tiled it a long time ago.
Yeah.
But as far as like on the business side, I don't like leaving unfinished projects because it gives me anxiety to have projects unfinished.
Okay.
And so I try to finish everything I start to the point that it's realistic. I don't always do that, but
give me a percentage. How often do you say, here's my project? How often do you actually complete the project as it was originally planned?
I would say a pretty high percentage. Like I feel pretty comfortable.
Put a number on it.
Oh man, that's such a hard one to answer.
Are you visualizing a pie chart?
2/3 or 3/4. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
75%.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. Because I can think of projects right now that I have here's where I get into trouble is I conceptualize mechanisms that would require extensive prototyping.
Okay.
And then I put them on sort of like a list. Like I even have a Trello list of like new product ideas.
Okay.
And there's a few down the list that are going to require immediate enough amount of like development and R&D that I've like paused them. And it seems to me that I have a tendency to want to do the easiest things first because it gives me the satisfaction of being able to complete them because I have a bias towards completing things.
Sure. Okay. Ooh.
So it's like I want to choose the low-hanging fruit because it gives me a completion loop. And there's some people that like being on the same project for a lot longer, whereas I'm extremely impatient, I would say. And so it's like, I don't want to set goals that I know are too far away. You know what I mean? So maybe that's a bad thing.
That's interesting.
I don't know, but it's definitely
I don't know.
a tendency.
This is like kind of rolling into, it's back into like process in general. Like this conversation I had with my coach the other day, kind of around the way my hyper focus works in relation to time. So if I'm in like a hyper focus state, no problem. Okay. This can be macro or not. And like, sometimes it is like a design, like I'm stuck in a design. I can't really detach. I'm aggravated if someone breaks my attention, and this could go on for a week. Okay. Um, there are, what I'm starting to learn is like on my side, there are periods that I'm almost starting to like put on a calendar and get a feeling for. So if I get interested in, like right now, I'm so doing the gym, right? So it's 5 days a week. I'm in the gym. I've got a start date that I tagged. I want to see when my hyper focus on this wears off. If I can start to like line that out, I think there's actually a methodology around like understanding that these periods of time shift and like
Mhm.
not fighting a weak position almost.
Mhm.
The scope creep thing recently has been the hardest one for me kind of around this stuff because dude, it's like I can't, if I try to focus on one thing, it's like everything surrounding it is more interesting.
Mhm.
So if I'm focusing on CAD, fixing up the CNC machine is more interesting. It's like it just starts to expand and expand and expand, or
Mhm.
I don't know. So that's like a muddy explanation of this, and I'm not even sure I really understand where you're at because
Mhm.
you're completionist. It sounds like,
Yeah.
but you like to start with the easy thing.
Yeah.
But do you procrastinate the difficult thing?
A little bit, I would say, yeah.
Are you like dopamining? Like do you need it for you to be engaged in a project? Does it need to be like give you a dopamine hit?
Um, Not totally. I think what it is for me is like, I mean, it might be that, but it feels. I feel like I operate like the path of least resistance is the preferable path. And I generally see a lot of paths that I'll at least start down and be like, okay, this is an uphill path, and I just went past a downhill path. I'm going to go back and go down the downhill path. And so I think the impression from the outside is like that I'm moving quickly and efficiently, but it's a product of always choosing a lower friction path. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that's part of what you're keying in on is like I'm getting a lot of things done, but it's
Yeah.
because I'm leaving a lot of complex things behind.
Which is crazy because you're still doing complex things. Okay. Okay, so scope creep, I think in the traditional context, is literally the scope of a project.
Mhm.
When you start, so I'm gonna make one knife, you're like making a knife and you're like, I can do this for a living and I'm gonna make 10,000 knives. Like when you start projects at this point, does your internal like expectation of scope, does that change? Or are you pretty aligned?
Oh man, tricky question. Maybe this I don't know if this answers it or not, but it feels like I mean one thing I mean I'll get back to like that the house thing that my wife and I do. It's like she has a more tendency to want to start more projects and
Okay.
balance a lot of projects. Whereas I want to put them one after the other and have completion and then move to the other. But the
Yes.
net effect is that I will actually completely neglect things that should be kept in balance because my brain operates in a one at a time way. I don't know if that even is close to
No,
what
it
you're
kind of it
asking,
kind of explains
but
because that's my brain is working on multiple things all the time.
yeah,
And it jumps. That's not always practical, like as a small business owner. Sometimes it's necessary and sometimes it's
yeah,
just like great skill.
yeah,
But a lot of times if it's like, hey, I have to do something, it's very important. It's not super exciting. That's where I'm trying to like figure out kind of like the like levers and mechanisms to like engage that
yeah,
in a more focused way.
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's just something that's par for the course.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think I actually don't think my brain jumps around a lot, but it's almost to the other side of the spectrum where it's a little bit of a problem, where it's like I'm not very good at multitasking. I think that's the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I lean into, like I said, being completionist. But if I take on a really complex problem, it's going to take too long, and not being able to multitask during that is going to cause a bunch of other things to have problems.
Right.
And so I think I've found what works for me is the shorter the time frame, the time horizon of a project, the more acceptable it is that I neglect everything else while I do that thing. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Okay. That makes sense. Right.
It's like a
If it's
coping thing.
1 day versus 1 year, that's a very
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
metric. Are you able to break down the longer term, more complex projects into pieces? Or do you feel that okay, I guess you answered that by saying you need to like start on something and finish it. Have you tried breaking them up into pieces?
Um, I think by nature, I'm sort of ending up doing that. There are times where obviously a piece is a piece, like you have to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tend to break everything down really small, if I can. I think small, like half day or 1 day projects get it done. I think that's like sort of how I thrive, is just like a checklist item that should take like 6 to 10 hours. Ignore everything until that's done, then like come up for air and put out the fires that started while I was doing that thing, and then do another 6 to 10 hour binge as fast as I can, and then
Straight into it.
because
Is
I'm
six
so bad at
hours your sweet
multitasking.
spot?
Yeah, honestly, like if something takes like 2 days, I start to get frustrated because I know the things that I'm ignoring because I'm so bad at multitasking. So it's like for example, I was working on the first vacuum fixture this week, and I was easily thinking I could do it in a day, but I ruined the first one, and then I had issues with the vacuum pump, and it turned into a 2 day ordeal. And by the end, like I had anxious frustration, and
Your
it's just
skin's crawling.
because it's like I know how many things
Yeah.
the clock is ticking on all the things that I'm ignoring right now,
Right.
and I cannot balance this amidst those other things. I have to get it done. And so like this morning,
Ooh.
uh, I was like, I'm spending 15 minutes this morning to diagnose this pump. And if I don't get it figured out or do, it doesn't matter. I'm completely ignoring this project and coming back to it later because it's so unnatural for me to do that, that I literally laid the night last night, I laid in bed telling myself that tomorrow morning you're not going to think about that vacuum pump after 15 minutes.
How'd
And
that work?
I had to like, it actually ended up working, but it took like 12 hours of like mentally preparing to like set something down and walk away from it because it's so unnatural. But there was too many things that after 2 days of working on that stuff, I could not continue. I needed to ship
This
knives.
is the
So,
point, right? Though, which is like you can either accept like the way that you do things. And I think like there's people that are good at this, or you can be curious about process as it relates to your abilities
mhm,
and then figuring out like how to make them work with like what you have to work with.
yeah.
That one's pretty interesting. You're like, okay, I know exactly what this is going to do to me. I'm going to put a cap on it. If it's not fixed within this time, I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
I don't know. Lately, like more and more, I'm interested in how people organize, like, not to say flaws,
Mhm.
but like the things that they struggle with. Cause like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
obviously, like, everybody has something in the shop that they struggle with. Like, even if we only look at the shop, what is it? And it's like, one, do you care enough about that thing to like try to be creative in the way that you solve the problem?
Mhm.
Or two, do you just accept it and move on?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the inability to multitask is probably the biggest thing that I've known for quite a long time, that I've had to. I think all these things I'm describing are not natural states, but they're coping mechanisms
Yeah.
for the inability to multitask.
I'm excited for you to read Start With Why.
Yeah.
I want to know the big question. I want to know if you are a how or a why. Because
Mm,
I can't answer. I know I can answer it for myself.
mm,
I can't answer it for you. And I'm like
okay.
very curious what you identify as. Have you ever
Yeah.
done Myers Briggs?
I have not.
That'd be another fun one.
Yeah. It's classic.
Dude,
It's like,
INFJ.
yeah.
Okay.
INFJ.
You mentioned your fixture. I want to talk about that. Sorry if that was a crazy
No, no,
digression.
that I like that conversation. That was good because yeah, that's meaningful to dive into the depths of the human brain.
Dude, our brains are
Yeah,
our brains are I don't know
yeah,
what they're messed up. They're
they're house of
complicated.
mirrors, dude.
Dude,
Yeah, so yeah, it's
all
interesting.
different.
Yeah,
Okay.
um,
Fixture plate. Let's go back to normal manufacturing.
yeah. So, yeah, I went ahead and machined a piece of plastic and was aiming to create a vacuum fixture that would mold the Kydex for an Overland Sport sheath. And it's a trial run with it because the next model that we're coming out with is going to be exclusively vacuum formed from the beginning. And I just want to get a jump start on doing that. I got it designed and programming. It actually ended up being a lot more work than what I was anticipating because a knife that I programmed to make in the real world, I programmed the scale, I programmed the tang with the bevel, and I can like glue on features onto the knife to mold kydex around it. But on this, I wanted everything integral into the solid block of plastic. So it's like it looks like a fossil, in the plastic, but it has to
Mm-hmm.
have the drain tube, it has to have blocking, it has to have the scale, the bevel, like all the chamfers. So it's like I'm reprogramming the entire Overland Sport, but all together into one little mass like that. And so it took a while to program. I ran it and made one error and drilled two holes that were problematic. So I reran it and I think got a functional piece without too
Okay.
much issue. But like I said, I'm having a little bit of a vacuum issue, so I need to figure that out.
Where did you go to learn, like, to get to the point where you were confident making this fixture? Like, where did you go just for resources?
I've seen a lot of like people on Instagram sharing their process about the vacuum forming, and I've known about it, but there's a few YouTube videos. Walter Sorrells did a video on it, and I just kind of read and watched videos, and then I've been contemplating it for like the better part of 2 years, like ever since I started with Kydex. So I guess I had a few game plan strategies that I was going to jump into. But the way that I'm doing it is different because a lot of people they create a vacuum fixture that or like base plate
Right.
that the fixture sits on, and the base plate is what distributes the vacuum to the fixture that's actually custom for that knife or whatever.
Got it.
Whereas I'm doing a one piece fixture that integrates the vacuum distribution into so every fixture is a standalone and there's no
Right. Okay.
base.
Yeah.
And I think I like that better for my needs. And it seems like it's going to work. We'll see.
Okay. I'm curious. I was trying to think, is this mostly like holster industry? Like for
Uh,
Kydex or
Firearm holsters are definitely where it's like most prevalent
most? Yeah,
because
most prevalent.
firearms are very hard to mold with foam because
Right.
they're so three dimensional.
Can't get a good clean mold.
Yeah, and so vacuum forming is used all over the place. But yeah, that seems like in the knife world, it's picking up steam fast. Seems like
Yeah.
a lot of people are doing it. Dauntless Manufacturing.
Yep.
I talked to him, and he was awesome, very helpful. And right before I hit go and started machining on the first one, he was kind of just bouncing ideas off him to make sure I wasn't missing something. And seems like I'm on a decent track, so
Nice.
appreciate his help there.
One thing we're like probably about ready to wrap up. I just wanted to acknowledge that the industry lost another
Mm,
great. Just wanted to,
yeah.
pay some respects to Grant Hawk.
Mm, yep.
Talk about
Yeah.
a legend.
Yeah, he's up the road from, hour and a half from us, but Gavin's one of my good buddies. Actually, he's the first designer that I really came to know that's one of the A-list guys. And yeah, they're quite the team.
Yeah.
So it's just unfortunate, but yeah, I think he left a good mark on the world. So
Good legacy.
yeah,
Talented son.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and a lot of really cool designs and
Yeah, yeah.
people scratching their head around how he came up with things.
Yeah, yeah. Total mad scientist
Yeah.
type in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. If
just
you're not familiar, do a little research.
yeah.
It
If
is,
you've
it's
ever
a cool
seen
story.
the older Hawk stuff. It's always said G&G Hawk.
Yeah.
It's Grant and Gavin. And Gavin, I believe in the beginning of like the G&G Hawk days was like, what, 9 years old or something?
Yeah.
So it was Grant, kind of leading the charge, and Gavin growing up inside the design game under his dad.
Yeah.
So it's
and just like absolutely two of the most like creative, talented,
yeah,
like out of the box thinking designers that I think the industry has, probably ever produced.
Mm-hmm.
Not to blow too much smoke, but it's true.
It's
absolutely true.
No. Yeah. As far as being like completely novel, I mean, they're close to being the best to ever do it, if not the best.
And just sheer volume. Like you look and you just don't understand how people can be like, for me, I'm like, I don't understand how people can be that creative, like how the brain works that way. It's like one mechanism after another, just executed perfectly with like radical design and like, oh man. Go do a little retrospective and check out some of the original like G&G Hawk designs and scratch your head.
So
all right.
Big piece of news. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, man.
That was on the top of my mind this week, but somehow escaped me.
I've been thinking about it a lot.
But
so all right, guys. I'm gonna call this one a wrap.
Yep.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah,
See
you guys
you in
have a good
Patreon.
one. Peace.